you talk about speaking to people. A lot of your work and your research in your area is about technology communicating. What conversations have you been having at the forum so far? A massive amount of the dialogue is all around, obviously, we're looking at the pandemic still, we're looking at the situation in Russia and Ukraine. Are the conversations you're having relating to those in your sphere, or are they sort of taking on a different angle?
You know, it's hard to ignore what's happening in the world, obviously, but I like to think of the technology conversations we're having as a ray of hope amongst everything that's going on. And so it's been exciting to speak to that. As you know, we had a panel on the promises and perils of AI. Wonderful panel, different points of view, which is exactly what you need to have. And so it's been great.
Wonderful. And so talk to us about the promise of AI. I think AI is one of those things where people, you've got your, obviously your evangelists, people who are already very, very excited about it. Then you have maybe a little bit of cynicism, and then obviously you've got maybe people that aren't initiated about the conversation. So what, from a global perspective, from a growth perspective, from a food security perspective, a sustainability perspective, the big topics, what is the promise of AI technology?
So, I mean, we're living in very exciting times in the sense that we've seen different things come together. We've seen the algorithms come together with advances in sensor technologies at scale, deployment of these sensors at scale, which allows us to pick up data. And we've seen advances in compute, which allows us to store, manipulate that data, and run algorithms on them. And so we've seen deep learning and AI emerge, and with that, the promise across industries. And I talked quite a bit about sort of my excitement about AI unlocking the sustainability challenge in the panel that we had yesterday. And I think that's a challenge that's existential for humanity. It's for everybody on the planet. We need to use our resources more efficiently. We need to be able to use our technologies in an optimal way, and AI holds the promise of that. But what I'd like to talk about maybe in this conversation is another aspect of AI, which is AI for smart buildings, AI for smart campuses, smart neighborhoods, and eventually smart cities. It's exciting. I will say one thing, I'm a control theorist. I should be excited about everything getting smart, but the reality is it's not just about making things smart for the sake of being smart. It's about what can it do for the human and what can it do for the environment.
Absolutely. So obviously there's been a lot of conversation around the development of smart cities in this part of the world. We have obviously the Smart Qatar program as well, looking to make Qatar a smart nation, as they describe it. Just for those who might not be familiar with the concept, summarize, as you've said, the importance of what a smart city can provide for citizens and visitors alike, I suppose, today, but also how that's going to impact our lives positively in the future.
I think there are two levels of this. One, as I alluded to earlier, is the ability to use your resources in an optimal way, to conserve energy, to conserve water, to reduce carbon footprint and the like. The other aspect of this is really to use technology to personalize the experience, to enhance the experience of the user, the safety of the user, the comfort of the user, the health of the user. And so I think both of these aspects come into play where sort of the built environment, buildings, campuses, cities come into place.
Absolutely. And so a question that I think is important, you may have had this conversation today. If I'm living in a nation that's quite wealthy, then this all sounds very exciting for me. Of course, the challenges we have around the world and our reliance on certain resources, it does disproportionately impact the more vulnerable. Smart cities sounds like an expensive concept. So is there a level beneath which it's not applicable or it's not possible for certain cities and certain nations and certain populations? How do we make it accessible is my question.
I think we need to be creative about the funding around it. And the idea is, again, if you're optimizing your use of resources, ultimately you're getting benefits back. And these benefits will pay themselves over the life of the investment. And so I think with creative financing, with people coming together there is a way to make it work in multiple instances, not just the rich cities or the rich buildings or the rich countries that get that advantage, basically.
Wonderful. And from an individual perspective, I mean, you talk about getting creative. The people that are actually creating these solutions, we're all aware of the sort of journey that IBM Watson has been on and the machine learning conversation that's been happening for many years. You look into tech startups, and you're working in obviously identifying and helping grow and scale these new startups. Can you give us an example of some of the very exciting companies that you've been working with?
I'm seeing a trend in machine learning. Let me go back to what I said earlier. We now have the ability with large data, large compute to do things we were not able to do in the past. However, there is a limit to that. It doesn't scale. And so what we're seeing in particular in AI is a move towards edgification, towards tiny machine learning. And in my mind, it's a stepping stone. It's a way of taking these intensive algorithms, trained algorithms, and pushing them to the edge through quantization, compression, and the like. So we've recently acquired a company in that regard, and I continue looking at this space because I think it's critical. I think there's more research to be done, frankly, because, as I said, sort of these techniques currently don't scale, and we need to be able to push the boundary further in terms of doing more with less data, less compute, less resources, and doing it from the very beginning. I'm very excited to look at companies in that space. The other thing is when you're putting AI in contact with humans, you have to consider the question of trust.
Of course.
Right, and there are a lot of different perspectives to that. Partially is how do the technologists trust that what they're putting out is robust, is fair, is safe, etc. But there's the aspect of, from the other perspective, how do humans trust these machines? And so there's, again, a direction going towards explainable AI, which is very critical. I'm excited to see some work emerging in the space, some startups emerging. I'd love to see more of them. The final thing I would say is I'd love to see more diversity among the startup founders in terms of there are usually a lot of men in the space.
Sure.
I would love to see women. I'd love to see people of color. I'd love to see people coming from different perspectives because I think it enriches that development as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it's an enabler, right? So the more we can diversify the people that are interested in using it, so you start to see how it can solve different challenges.
Not just using it, right, and developing the technology, and that's critical.
Absolutely. So we talk about, you mentioned the challenges of when we talk about data and huge amounts of data. It is a bit of a trigger word these days for people on a day-to-day basis, all the way up to governments. With all technologies, you can use it, you can also abuse it. What are some of the concerns around AI or potentially the pitfalls, I suppose?
Yeah, I think we're always treading a balancing act. And again, there are multiple dimensions to that. One is, how are you going to use the AI? Is it to inform the individual? Is it to augment the individual? Is it to replace the individual, to remove them from a feedback loop? And there are considerations there. There's another question, which is, again, when you have technology working or being in close contact with humans, you have to be concerned about privacy, you have to be concerned about anonymity, and you need to balance that against the utility that the technologies are providing for these individuals. And there's no prescriptive solution in my mind. You need to sort of base your assessment for a use case, grounded in an understanding of the technology, how well it works in particular use cases, how robust it is, how much can you have confidence in it. And finally, I think there is a cultural context to it as well. We don't live in a homogeneous world, and that's great. That adds to the richness, but that also informs how people think about technologies, how people react to technologies, how tolerant they are to technologies, and all of that needs to be taken into account. So there is no prescriptive answer. We should be looking at the use cases and the context and the technologies very closely in making that call.
Absolutely, and that also raises into that last point you make. It's interesting. It raises the conversation around bias in technology building as well. We see a lot that almost by accident, we start to feed even machine learning. We've seen these biases come through, whether it be biases towards men, or biases towards certain cultures, biases towards certain languages, whether it's facial recognitions, whatever it might be. How do we stop our inherent biases getting fed into these machines that we're building, this technology we're building?
The first thing I would say is the fact that the general public is aware of this being an issue is already a great step forward.
Step, yeah.
Right? Because now we know we have a problem, and we know we have a problem we need to solve. And again, there's no prescriptive answer, but I think the more diversity you can get in the pipeline of technology development, the more different perspectives you can get in, people who are aware of these pitfalls, who see things from a different perspective, the better off you are.
Absolutely. And it's funny, it's interesting, you mentioned earlier about starting to become a little bit dominated by males. Often seems to be the case, even if at the beginning of a market it's being dominated or led by a minority, that once it starts to pick up speed, it slowly gets cannibalized by males. From your perspective, obviously you've said that, but are you seeing a bright future in terms of a diverse workforce coming in AI? Is there a real good interest from around the world? Is there a good interest from different cultures, from these different backgrounds? Are you optimistic about the future, might be the question.
It's always good to be optimistic. I will say, in my experience, the world has not changed a whole lot. I studied undergraduate engineering in the 90s. I'm dating myself here. I'll do that. And I was one of a handful of women in the room. I went on to become a faculty, again in engineering, and I was again one of a handful of women in the room. I am now a tech venture investor. I am again one of a handful of people in the room. I talk to startup sort of CEOs and CTOs all the time. There are very few women in the field, and everything I'm saying could be said for other minorities. It's just I'm giving you my perspective as a woman. So I hope things will change. The pace has not been great, I will say. I would love to see it pick up. I think we're hearing more conversations around this in the past few years, and I hope the talk will turn into something more than just conversations.
Absolutely. There's a lot of conversation, particularly here, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, places like this, to drive interest in studying STEM subjects through women. And it's got incredibly good pickup in recent years. Is that an area where you think there's a good opportunity? Is that a good starting point to get people interested?
I think it's an absolutely fantastic starting point. I think we absolutely need that. We need a very concerted effort to get people who are usually underrepresented in these fields to become represented in these fields. So I completely applaud these efforts. And I think as you get more women, more underrepresented folks in these areas, it becomes sort of a self-fueling sort of advance, if you will.
In technology, we've got a lot of old fellas still hanging around. We've got our big IBMs, we've got our Ciscos, we've got our Huaweis. Are they going to be the companies that lead us into this next era, or are we going to start seeing a changing of the guard in this respect?
I don't think it's a one or the other. I think there is a role for big companies to play. I think they have the institutional memory that is critical for technology advancement. I think there is a huge role for startups to play, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. And I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I think startups force the big companies to be more agile, to see things in a different way. Big companies can bring resources to bear to help the startups grow in a way that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Whether it's understanding the customer base, understanding the market, helping with joint development and the like. So I don't view it as a zero-sum game. Quite the contrary. I think if we can get both of these to work together, we're doing a great job.